In this video, we're going to cover PS2 emulation on the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch. Ah yes, here it is, the updated PS2 vid I knew was coming, and hey, it's only been about 2 weeks since the last one, so there we go, it lasted longer than I thought. But progress has been made on the PCSX2 core to fix some glaring regressions that came with the latest build of Retroarch. A lot of PS2 games no longer boot, they just crash to dev mode, and so I had us reverting back to the 1.9.6 version as a temporary measure. Well, now I'm going to have you revert to a newer version. The one that's still included within Retroarch by default is still the busted version, so in this video I'm going to show you how to replace it with the new updated build. That way we could just enjoy our PS2 gaming and take advantage of those numerous changes that came to the core, like automatic widescreen patches. Now that being said, there are still some issues with this version of the core. You might notice some graphical glitches and bugs here and there, and just other oddities. That's to be expected. This is still an alpha version core. PCSX2 is still very much in development under Retroarch, but hey, what we got is pretty awesome, and I'm not going to complain. But let's dive in. Alright, so the first thing we need to do to get PS2 emulation up and running on the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch is to install the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch. Pay special attention to the expanding dev mode storage section here because we need that to store our PS2 games on the internal SSD, as well as the advanced setup section at the end of the video on how to access your Xbox's internal SSD, because in this video we show you how to redirect a number of folders to the S drive for easy access on your computer. If you haven't done either of these steps, go back and do them now, otherwise this video is not going to make any sense, because we use this stuff. Link in the description below. Next, we need to download a couple of files, the first one being the latest version of the PCSX2_libretro.dll. So, link in the description below to this, but just get it downloaded. And next we need our PCSX2 folder. I have a pre-made version in my Dropbox as well, so again, link in the description, just get it downloaded. And once you have these files downloaded, we just need to get them extracted. I put them in zip format, so they should work with any unzipping program. But I'm just going to grab them both here, and with 7-zip, I'm going to tell them to extract here. And that leaves me with a PCSX2 libretro DLL file, and a PCSX2 folder. And I don't need those anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of them. But anyway, so we're going to start off with our PCSX2_libretro.dll core file. All we need to do with this is place it in the cores folder of our Retroarch folder. So access your Xbox's internal SSD from your computer. So again, that's why I said pay special attention to that advanced setup section guide. If you made a network file share like I recommended, it's as easy as just opening it up. Once inside, go into Windows Apps, find your Retroarch folder, cores folder, and just drag the core right on in, and when it asks you to replace it, just go ahead and do so. Sorry, I'm copying a bunch of stuff over my network, so let's get that out of the way. But with the core file placed, just go up a level here, and head into your system folder, and this is where we're going to place our PCSX2 folder. But before we can place the PCSX2 folder, we need to add in a PS2 BIOS file to it. Now, over on my channel, I've outlined 2 different ways to dump a PS2 BIOS. If you have a hacked PS2, this top guide's for you. If you have an unmodified slim PS2, this bottom guide will work for you really well. But you can easily dump the BIOS from your own PS2 console following one of these 2 guides. Or, as always, you can resort to the shady part of the net and just grab one that way. I really don't give a crap which way you do it, just don't ask me for illegal download links because I will not give them to you. But once you have sourced your PS2 BIOS file, it'll look something similar to this, but let's just get this added into our PCSX2 folder. So if you open up the PCSX2 folder, make sure that this structure is how it is set up first and foremost. It'll say PCSX2, and when you open it up, you'll see a BIOS folder, cheats folder, and cheats_WS folder. This is all we need it to look like. It's a lot more streamlined than the last few PCSX2 folders have been because a lot of this stuff has just been added into the core itself, which is awesome. Hey, look, this BIOS folder. Let's go ahead and drag our PS2 BIOS right on inside. Done. And with that in place, and making sure that the folder structure is correct, again, PCSX2, BIOS cheats widescreen. That's it. We're ready to go ahead and put this into our Retroarch system folder. So just go ahead and drag it on in. Alright, so if you're updating from an older version of the PCSX2 core and you followed one of my older guides, and you just want to add in the new libretro DLL, you can do that. You just need to go into your development files folder, Windows Apps, Retroarch folder, go to the cores folder, and just replace it. And then you'll be up and running with the new core, your saves will still be in the system folder, everything will be exactly as you had it. But you'll have the updated core where more things are supposed to be working. Now, if you want to back up your stuff out of the system folder, use this new PCSX2 folder. You can head into your system folder, find your PCSX2 folder, copy your memory cards back to your computer, and your BIOS file, that way you just don't have to worry about it. But then you could delete this PCSX2 folder and replace it with the other one, and still be running, and then you could just put your memory card folder and BIOS folder back on in. Drag it right in. And that way you just got a much more streamlined PCSX2 folder. Of course, if you want to use the new memory card format, you don't have to put the memory cards back in here, but the formats are a little bit different, so if you just don't want to have to worry about it, I just recommend leaving memory cards in the system folder. And once you have that core file and the PCSX2 folder in place, the last thing we need is to source some PS2 games. But back over on my channel, I do have a guide on how to back up your DVD-based PS2 games if you have a physical collection of them. Or as always, you could just resort to the shady parts of the net to download them. I once again don't care how you do it, just don't ask me for the illegal links because they aren't going to be given. Now, PS2 games could be in a variety of formats. They could be in ISO, bin, CISO, CHUD, gzip. Any of these formats should work just fine under Retroarch. My demonstration purposes, I only have ISO and bin files. I don't have any of these things compressed, but again, they should work just fine if they are. Now, I wholeheartedly recommend still putting all of your PS2 games onto the internal SSD of your Xbox. Progress is being worked on to make it so these games can boot from USB, but they still come with that glaring issue if they don't delete themselves after you play them, which can clog up your Q drive and screw over your entire Retroarch installation. So unless you want to manually delete PS2 games from the Q drive every time you play them from USB, it's so much easier just to put them on the internal SSD. And not to mention they boot practically instantly that way, instead of having to wait for them. So I mean, it's kind of a win-win. So from our system folder, go up a level, find your games folder, and then drag your PS2 games right on in. And then just be patient with it while it does its thing. And once those games have finished copying over, we're ready to move on over to our Xbox. And now back over on your Xbox, go ahead and get booted into Retroarch. And once Retroarch is finished loading up, we're free to begin loading into our PS2 content. So one method of doing so, go down to load content, navigate down to the S drive, program files, Windows apps. Find your Retroarch folder, find your games folder, your PS2 games folder, choose a game, and it should load up automatically under PCSX2. If not, you just have to choose the core. I'm personally not a huge fan of this method, so I like to make a games playlist instead, and I do this by going down to import content, manual scan, and then from here choose a content directory, so go back into that S drive folder path, so S, program files, Windows apps, Retroarch folder, games folder, PS2 games, scan this directory. Next, go down to system name, and press up on your D-pad to get to the Sony section quicker, and click on PlayStation 2. Now for default core, same thing, up on your D-pad to find Sony PlayStation 2 PCSX2. And next, we could set some file extensions for all the different types of files that work under PCSX2. So for example, ISO, bin, CHUD. So just set whichever ones you happen to be using, and then just press start when you're ready to go. Now make sure scan recursively is set to on, and then go ahead and start the scan. And once that scan's completed, you'll have a new PlayStation 2 games entry here on the left. And then to play a game, all you need to do is go over to it, press A on it, and tell it to run. And there we go, PlayStation 2 Emulation up and running on the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch. And I specifically chose Burnout 3 here because it is a game that does not run under the default PCSX2 core that came included with 1.9.9. But as you can see here, it is running perfectly. Well, at least loading perfectly. Now, when you first start playing PS2 games, it might ask you to format your PS2 memory card. Make sure you press yes to do this, otherwise you won't be able to save your games. And after you got that set, you're free to just begin enjoying a number of PS2 titles. Again, compatibility is not 100%, there are going to be numerous bugs and graphical glitches by default, and some things might just be uncorrectable, which is to be expected. Alpha level core. But for the most part, you can enjoy a good number of the PS2 library directly from your Xbox Series X and S, and it's pretty friggin' sweet, to be honest. And you could also go into the core options and change a number of settings to get better compatibility and graphics out of a couple of titles. But depending on the game you want to play, you could browse the PCSX2 Wiki, and you can scroll down and they will usually have a known issues section here with different types of workarounds you can try to apply. Do be aware anything that requires software mode, like the Sky fix here in Burnout 3, we don't have access to software renderers within the Retroarch version of PCSX2 on Xbox, so do be aware of that, but PCSX2 Wiki is going to be your best friend at applying per game settings, so we'll have a link in the description below for this as well. And just as a quick demonstration here, multiplayer is fully supported within the PCSX2 core, but at the moment it is limited to just 2 players. I don't believe there's any multi-tap support as of this moment. But as you can see, I am able to control both players badly, because I can't concentrate like this and talk at the same time, but both players are fully playable within PCSX2, and it's pretty awesome. And just as a quick note, whenever you close out of PS2 content, it will crash Retroarch back to the dev screen. So for those of you looking to get PS2 emulation up and running on your Xbox Series X and S, that is the basic process on how to do so. Add in that new version of the core so you can take advantage of all the new features and not have your games fail at load, for the most part. But now let's go ahead and dive into some of the more advanced core options available to us within PCSX2. So going into our Retroarch quick menu, scroll down to Options. And our first option is to choose our system BIOS. If you put more than one PS2 BIOS into your system folder, you could choose between them here. Next up, system language. You could set the language for that here. Next up, system fast loading. This is basically a disk drive speed up. Not all games are compatible with this, so you will want to look up if your game can support faster loading or not. Next up, fast boot. This skips past the PS2 logo screen. This might be needed for a couple of games. Next, boot to BIOS. If you need to manage your memory card options, you can enable this option, restart the emulation, and then it will boot you to the BIOS screen where you can manage your memory cards and save files. Next, we have a couple of memory card options for slot 1 and slot 2. If you're loading this core up from scratch, it will be set to a shared memory card of 8 megabytes in size by default. If you put your mem card files back into your PCSX2 system folder, it will be set to the legacy method. That's not even an option to choose from if you don't have those cards placed. But if it says legacy, that means you have your memory cards in the system folder, and that's perfectly fine. And then for memory card slot 2, you can choose between an 8 and 32 megabyte shared memory card here. Again, I like to do a 32 megabyte shared memory card just to have save backups available. There are some games that won't work with larger memory card sizes, so that's why it's great to have the 8 megabyte one here in slot 1 as default. Next up, video renderer, leave this alone. Next, internal resolution. This is set to native PS2 by default, but you can crank this up quite high on PS2 emulation, to be honest. But as always, if you start to notice some lag that didn't happen before you increase the internal resolution, just lower it back down and hopefully the lag goes away with it. Next up, deinterlacing modes. So a lot of PS2 games are stuck in 480i output, so you could choose between a number of different deinterlacing modes here. Depending on the game and play, you will have different results with each and every one of these, so go through them, see which ones you like. I leave mine set to auto right now, and it's been working out okay for the most part. Next up, video aspect ratio. You can choose between 4:3 or 16:9. So there are a number of PS2 games that had a 16:9 aspect ratio, so you could set this here, restart the content, and have it take effect. Or if your game didn't support widescreen by default, there are a number of widescreen patches available for PS2 games, and you can enable the widescreen patches here. You will need to restart the content for them to take effect, and the game in question might not have a widescreen patch yet, but you can manually add them into that widescreen, or that cheats_ws folder. And next, enable 60 FPS patches. So just as with the widescreen patches, a number of 60 FPS patches have been implemented into the PCSX2 core for you to take advantage of. This does not mean they will work well. I want to get that out up front. They may be here, but they may not work well, so use them, see what you think. If it doesn't give you the performance you're looking for, turn it back off. Next up, full screen anti-aliasing. Turn this on or off to reduce some jaggies. Anisotropic filtering, you should be able to increase this to 16x without any issue. Dithering. So the PS2 used dithering for some of its color palette, so you can scale this with your resolution upscale, or you can leave it unscaled, or you can turn it off entirely. Might see some color banding issues with it off, but try it out, see what you think. Next up, texture filtering. This is set to bilinear PS2 default. That is the most accurate filtering method for the PS2, but you could also try a couple of different ones here. So you could go with nearest, which just gives you a nice blocky output, but for accuracy's sake, leave this on bilinear PS2. Next up, mip mapping. This is set to automatic by default, and that's good to leave it there. Next, conservative buffer allocation, leave this on. Accurate date, leave this on. We're gonna skip over frame skip stuff because, And we get to rumble support. If you don't want to have rumble, you can turn it off here, or you can leave it on. And set the intensity as you see fit. Next, cheats. If you want to use cheats on the PCSX2 core, you need to load the PNAC file into system PCSX2 cheats. And once you have those placed, you can enable it here. Next, we have our speed hack presets. This is set to safe by default. On Xbox, I usually set this to balanced, but you could go up to aggressive if you want to in certain games as well. I really don't recommend very aggressive or mostly harmful. They will break things. Next, we have VSyncs and MTGSQ. So this deals with controller input latency. If the default value of 2 is too much input latency for you, you could try to drop it down to 1, but it will come at a performance cost. It might be negligible for most games. I really haven't given this the most testing, so experiment with it in your own games, see what you think. I just leave it at the default 2 personally. And the last few settings are all going to be stuff that you set on a game-by-game basis. Again, refer back to that PCSX2 wiki for game-specific things you might need to set, but that includes emulation clamping mode, round mode, and a number of different hacks. Again, the PCSX2 wiki is going to be your best friend for all of these settings. But that does it as far as core options within PCSX2 are concerned. Now, normally, you could just set these options and be done with it, but with this version of PCSX2, it isn't saving the global config file on exit because it is crashing. So my temporary workaround is to save a core options file for every single game. So head up to Manage Core Options, Save Game Options File. That way your settings don't get lost when you leave the game. And again, the reason I bring this up is most of these options do require content restarts to take effect, so you will have to close out of the content, which then crashes you back to the dev mode home screen. But when you get back into your game after reloading it, you will see that all of the changes have taken effect. So I mean, we are now using a widescreen patch for Half-Life, even though this game technically had a widescreen mode to begin with. Just saying. But you can see that I'm running it at a much higher internal resolution than before, and it just looks stunning for a game from 1998, if I do say so myself. But that's going to do it as far as PS2 emulation is concerned as it stands of today. As always, if you happen to have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section below, and I will do my best to try to help you out. But now if you could all do me a huge favor, and please be sure to hit that like or dislike button, just depending on how much you like today's tutorial. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit that sub button so you can see when new videos go live on the channel. Content is continually being updated, and we love having you all along for the ride. If you'd like to further help support the channel, you can also check out that join button here on YouTube, or the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Little goes a long way to keeping this place up and running, that way we can bring more updated vids like this to all of you. Big shout out to all of our current backers who have just believed in what we're doing here and have dropped that support. Just thank you all so much for being our rock stars. But that's going to do it for this one, so until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome, and we will see you back next video.